The Edgeless Horseman here. I thought I'd just do a quick video about the latest news release. First of all, as the title says, Novo reports significant sub 1mm gold from Egina. We have been waiting to learn more about the finer gold at Egina, and thankfully it seems that there's potentially widespread finer gold distribution throughout the terrace. And the main thing, at least to me, is that it seems that there's a finer gold halo that stretches beyond the higher grade swales, and that is obviously very important because that opens up the possibility of bulk mining at Egina, not just going after the actual high grade swales, but potentially, I don't know, maybe you could mine basically every flat area you see. I mean, that's left for Novo to prove, but anyway, I mean, so far this is basically as good of news as we could have gotten, because I was personally not sure if there would be economic gold quantities beyond the swale, and I didn't know if how high the grades would be in the actual swale. But as you can see here, a more complete picture of alluvial gold and its distribution is taking shape at Egina. Blah 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 blah. And the second main thing is that, as they say here, although we call the sub 1mm gold fine, is mostly comprised of over 0.1mm particles that should be readily recoverable by traditional dry gravity concentrators such as rotary air concentrators. We also see potential for mechanical sorter to recover such gold, and will be testing that possibility shortly. In brief, we see the contribution of sub 1mm as a benefit to the project without adding significant technological hurdles with respect to recovery. Our terrace covers many hundreds of square kilometers, so if this style of mineralization persists across the greater region, we think we have a considerable potential for finding a large gold deposit that can be treated by dry, chemical-free processing. So the 0.1mm threshold stands out because that's what Novo is about to test with Tomra and or Steinert, because some of those guys believe they can actually drive down the detection limit to 0.1mm, and if the bulk of all the gold around Egina is above 0.1mm, I mean, then there's a possibility for possibly sorting to basically recover most of the gold and be a one technique fitting all solution, if you know what I mean. Which would of course be pretty insane, that all gold could be, or most of the gold could be recovered by a processing technique that costs $0.26 per ton, which is almost free basically. As you can see here, here are the sampling sites. And the average for the middle of the swale was 1.7 grams per cubic meter, and at the margin of the swale it was 0.6 grams per cubic meter, and everywhere else the average was 0.3 grams per cubic meter, which is about the global average for alluvial deposits. So basically, global average around the swale and much higher grades within and near the swales, up to multiple times the global average. And I think that this trench is somewhere along here, something like that. You can see they have basically mapped out the axis of the swale. It's sloping down to the southeast. And I guess one very important thing is that they're still basically only at the edge of the targeted swale, as it says here, opens up onto greater terrace to the east. So I mean, and they've confirmed gold here and around here, I think, and that's again at the edges of the greater terrace. So what does that mean for this? I really don't know, but I just assume that, okay, if we're at the edges of the erosional front, that means that there should have been more gold liberated out into the actual swale, and possibly, you know, the greater terrace having drained some gold from the edges. So I mean, it shouldn't be out of the question that it's just simply perhaps has even higher concentrations of gold. So I mean, as a first result, to see R grades at the very edge of this greater terrace, I'm not a geologist, but to me I would just assume that it's very promising for the rest of the greater terrace, which would have seen more erosion and possibly inflow of gold from the edges. And yeah, basically that. So again, I mean, there's much left to discover, and we're at the moment limited by the boundaries or mining lease, but to have these results and to have all samples gold bearing sure paints a pretty picture when we head out into the main prize, which is I mean, it's huge, and this is just one of the areas where we got these flat terraces. I mean, these things stretches for hundreds or thousands of kilometers and hundreds of square kilometers. So we're still just yeah, basically nibbling at the edge of one of these greater terrace areas. So I mean, that of course leads us to what it might cost to mine these, because if the mining is cheap enough, I mean, that of course opens up vaster and vaster areas, because you wouldn't even need the high grade swales, which should be, you know, economic beyond belief. But if we can see a future where we could bulk sample possibly, you know, almost endless amount of lands, that makes the Egina target a very interesting proposition. And I just played around with some numbers some days ago. For example, the 3 previous bulk samples had 337.2 grams per grams of coarse gold, and that wasn't including the fine gold. And that amount basically amounts to $15,938 US dollars worth of gold at 1470 gold price. And it would cost Novo, I mean, theoretically, assuming Steinert knows what they're talking about $0.26 per ton, it would cost Novo $98.2 to process and capture gold worth 15,938, which obviously leaves a lot of room to cover everything. It basically leaves $41.9 per ton to cover processing costs and stuff like that. And I mean, if you compare it to, for example, Beaton's Creek, when Novo assumed, you know, conventional processing and stuff, and the fact that Beaton's Creek is still hard rock and not pre-milled loose gravels, $2.4 per ton in mining costs. I assume it should be quite a bit cheaper for Egina, since everything's basically near or at surface, and again loose gravels, and would simply just use a continuous miner that just, you know, goes on endlessly, just digging up dirt. And especially here you can see, I mean, the processing costs for oxides and sulfides $15 to $17 per ton. I guess that includes you know, crushing and grinding and stuff though, but I mean if we just compare it to the free milling, or yeah, the pre-milled Egina, I mean we would substitute these numbers with $0.26. $0.26, and this would be lower as well. I'm pretty sure of that. Then there's the general and administration costs, of course. But just to play around with some numbers, for example, here 1.7 grams per cubic meter. You measure it in cubic meters because that's how alluvial mining works. But anyway, if we convert that to tons, that's 0.94 grams per ton, which is worth about $44.7 US, and I'm using US dollars for simplicity, even though I mean the Australian gold price is, I think it's near the all-time high, and the US dollars gold price isn't, so this might be, you know, comparatively even more valuable in Australia. But anyway, just to make it easy, then we subtract the 26 cents in processing cost. That leaves $44.44 to cover the continuous miner cost and screening and stuff like that. And I mean, I don't know, what would it cost to dig up 1 ton of dirt, which is equal to 0.56 cubic meters. I mean, that must be, I don't know, below $1, I would assume, but I don't know. Then there's the rehabilitation cost or reclamation cost. I mean, it might very well end up that reclamation is actually the biggest cost in this endeavor. And if you look at the 0.3 grams per cubic meter, that's beyond the swale basically. I mean, that's still $7.34 US to cover the mining costs and all that stuff. I mean, that's kind of a lot. Even if you compare here, let's say we substitute the processing cost to 0.26 cents or $0.26, which is equal to 26 cents. I mean, even if you use the metrics for Beaton's Creek, which is of course not as simple of a deposit to mine, since it's hard rock and stuff like that. Everything is not starting at surface. It's not homogeneous. Blah blah blah. I mean, that still leaves a pretty hefty margin. I mean, just assume, okay, 1 ton for this instead, and 26 cents here. Then it's just general and administrative costs and rehabilitation costs. I mean, it's still early days, but I mean, I could see the broad disseminated lower grade halo, which is again along the lines of the global average, to be, I mean, very profitable. I mean, we could be making a lot of cash in that case, and if that's the case, I mean, why shouldn't we just add a bunch of ore sorters and continuous miners and plow everything? I mean, then it would be basically, assuming that this is mineralized at least around 0.3 grams per cubic meter, we could be plowing a large area of land. And again, I mean, this is quite a deposit, if so, and it goes on for I mean, this is just a snapshot, and here you can see basically some areas where there have been scrapings and historic mining and stuff like that, and this might be the area where LMTD just went out and did a basically blind panning exercise and found fine gold. Fine gold. So I mean, okay, what does that suggest? They just went out, picked a spot, found gold. I mean, yeah, I mean, you'll have to draw your own conclusions, but I have no idea why why this area, where I guess the gravels could be a bit deeper down, if it indeed, I mean, if the swales, which Quinton describes as finger in a hand, actually lead out to this area. So I mean, will we have a high grade bulk target out here, or will we just have many swales and, I don't know, higher grades? I mean, that's left for Novo to find out. But again, I mean, every bulk sample here showed gold, and there's been gold found everywhere, and I have no idea why this shouldn't be mineralized, since it's basically draining that way from the edges. So I mean, if I don't know if we even need it to get better, because again, if we can even make the lowest grades work, I mean, then I don't know, what would the cutoff be? I don't know, 0.2 grams per cubic meter. I just know that the swale should be insanely profitable, and who knows how many, you know, continuous miners could be chewing up all this ground. So I mean, personally, I think I'm very confident that there is a huge gold target or gold deposit at Egina, and to me the question is just or more that how much will we be able to mine per year? Because I mean, these operations should be pretty cheap to get up and running as well, and they're basically modular, so you could just keep adding a continuous miner with its ore sorters and stuff, again assuming that that process works, which I think it will. I think they will solve it, because there's some very smart people involved in this. So I mean, they could just be, I don't know, ramping up endlessly, and you know, they're here pretty much, and all this is basically lag gravel targets, and I guess this as well. So I mean, you could have operations everywhere, continuous miner just chewing up these lag gravels all over. And Novo said it themselves. There's nothing is you know, forcing them to just work at one area. I mean, they could mine a lot of places at the same time. So anyway, yeah, those were my quick thoughts on this. I was very positively surprised that the grade in the swale was actually higher than I thought, and I was really not sure that there would be fine gold or appreciable gold beyond the swale. But thankfully every bulk sample showed gold that might be economically recoverable. I mean, just doing the quick calculations, I think it's, I don't know, a high likelihood of that being economic, especially if you can use ore sorters or some other dry processing, because I think those are really cheap, and I think it's up to basically reclamation cost that might, you know, be the most expensive thing in this whole endeavor. And I don't know a single gold operation in the world that could say that, because again, if you just compare to typical mining, Egina should be cheaper basically on everything here, and even general and administrative costs, because I mean, how many people do you need to have to run a continuous miner with, let's say, attached ore sorters? I mean, those are obviously automated units, so you don't need to, you know, truck around a lot of ore and stuff like that. So I don't know, I think Egina will be much cheaper on all of these factors, and again, that would leave potentially reclamation as the main cost. Anyway, I was very positively surprised, because as I said, I wasn't sure that there would be gold beyond the swales, and yeah, It all looks good to me, and I think Novo looks better than ever. I'm of course biased because I have a huge position and they are a sponsor of my site, so you'll have to make up your own conclusions. Thanks for listening.